Hello everyone, my name is Jeff Rolka. Thank you for checking out my video. This is Questions from Comments 37, a segment where I get to take a look at the questions that you have posed in the comments on various videos on the channel, and I get to address them. It is one of my favorite segments that I do here on the channel, so thank you for your contributions. I'm not going to waste any time here. I'm going to get to the questions and answers. Thank you if you've chosen to subscribe. If you haven't yet, I hope that you'll do so now. For those of you that want to get this information in an MP3 format, check out Patreon. You can get PDFs of my practices as well as MP3s of the exercises that I do here on YouTube. Moving swiftly on. I have two questions. We're going to take these one at a time, just FYI. When a male singer tries to carry his lower register technique into the upper range of the voice, he generally feels increasing muscular tension in the larynx and has to get louder to get the tone out. Said tone usually becoming sort of harsh and shouty, it seems to me. Is that the thyroarytenoid muscle we feel when we do that? Stiffening the folds for pitch as opposed to stretching them with the cricothyroids. In a word, yes, that is a very good definition of what it is to belt. A commitment to the thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice, or thyroarytenoid muscles, also called the vocalis muscles, and an increase in breath energy, and a commitment to not allowing the cricothyroid muscles to elongate the vocal folds. And so you stay in that thyroarytenoid chest voice mode of singing. Sometimes it's referred to as entering the call of the voice. It is also referred to as belting. Definitions do vary from school of thought to school of thought on this. So when I talk about this and I use terms like entering the call of the voice or belting or, yelling in tune or something to that effect, although I wouldn't usually refer to it that way, that is fairly specific to the Richard Miller sort of thought process around this. Different schools will talk differently about it. And two, I believe I know the feeling and sound of breathy and pressed phonation singing. Is that sensation in the throat, going from pretty much nothing to a tight feeling, my cord closure increasing from too little to too much? And if so, is the sensation of cord closure I'm looking for somewhere between the two? A question of degree of the sensation guided by both comfort in my throat and the freeness of the sound I produce. Hoping I might make the next questions from comments video. Well, the answer to the last part of that would seem evident because here we are in questions from comments. And again, in a word, yes, that breathy sound is produced when the vocal folds are abducted. A-B-D-U-C-T-E-D. There might be two T's there. Abducted, separated. That's not totally separated. They're only really totally separated when you're inhaling. There, the vocal folds have to separate entirely. This is why if you're hearing like a draggy breath, like a where people are dragging the air in that way and there's an audible sound, that there's some amount of vocal fold engagement happening on the inhalation. This is why we work towards having a silent breath. It indicates a release of the vocal mechanism. And yes, the most efficient mode of phonation is found when the vocal folds are neither too separated or abducted, nor too pressed together, adducted with force or squeezed. That's where, like in the middle there, between those two, we'll find the most efficient use of our voice. We seek that especially when we are trying to learn more about vowel alignment. Registration event practice is made far easier when we have that efficient mode of phonation happening. because it allows for the greatest amount of release of muscle tension in the aural cavity, A-U-R-A-L. So all of that soft tissue material in the aural cavity that resonates sympathetically with our voices and gives us those big, rich, projecting sounds, all of that is facilitated by this efficiency. Elongation of the vocal fold for upper register response, also facilitated by this efficiency. My warm-ups are designed to help us learn how to find that efficiency. And then it's your task as the artist to make the decision as to whether or not you want to stay in that mode of phonation or deviate for some artistic purpose. Now, there are other practices you can engage in to pursue those artistic differences away from that like balanced, efficient sound. But most of the time, we are looking at those changes and adjustments before we've really truly found that most efficient, seamless phonation across the various ranges of our voice. So I'm a big advocate for finding that efficient usage of the voice, and then from there making the decisions artistically about what you need. Oftentimes in today, this means having a little bit of a breathy sound. And once you've figured out how to seamlessly go back and forth all across all these registers and have good, efficient adduction or closure of the vocal mechanism, it's pretty easy to learn to separate it again a little bit for when you need that kind of modern pop vocal sound that has that kind of sort of breathless quality to it, breathy but breathless at the same time somehow. Anyways, great questions, both. I hope that answers them. I have a question concerning support. I have seen advice that recommends I tense the lower abs, pelvic floor region when singing, but I've also seen advice that says I don't need to tense anything at all. I'm not sure who is correct on this, and I don't want to get accustomed to a bad technique unwittingly. Can you give me some input on this? All the best. Yes, I can, of course, offer some input on this. First and foremost is that there's no consensus on breathing for singing. So asking me, you will get one opinion, which of course I think is well informed and well researched. And it also has played out for me personally in my own singing and for the clients that I've had the pleasure of working with. But if you ask someone else, they may disagree entirely and have a completely different way of talking about breathing for singing. It is very common to hear things like belly breathing and breathe from the diaphragm without actually getting any more information than that. Support the sound, we're told, or breathe from your belly, or breathe from your diaphragm. But what does that even mean? Many times I ask a new client, like, where is the diaphragm? And they point to their front of their stomach. That's not your diaphragm. Those are your rectus abdominis muscles. Your diaphragm is much higher in the body. It's connected side to side for the ribs, and it in fact is attached to the sac that your heart is in. So it's much higher up in your torso than most of us initially think. Breathing for singing is something I'm very passionate about. I work to practice and teach the Passaggio breath management system, which is taken from bel canto singing practices. And it relies on a number of different postures, but I've broken it down into three basic thoughts. Lateral expansion of the rib cage. So if this is me at rest, then when I'm going to sing, my ribs come out laterally. This draws my diaphragm down, and I'm going to try to slow the lift of the diaphragm. And to do that, I'm going to engage my core body muscles, and they're going to work antagonistically with the diaphragm. And this relationship is what creates the subglottic air pressure. So support, right? Subglottic air pressure below the epiglottis, the air in your lungs. And it is that works in conjunction with the vocal folds to produce sound. I go through the breathing practice in my AAA method. That's free. You just sign up for my newsletter on my website and you can go right to it and get that practice done. I've done a few videos here on the channel. You can look up Passaggio breath management, or I'll put a link in the cards and you can check that out. Additionally, I've done a breathing for singing course. That course is not free. but it is a comprehensive step-by-step method to either reinforce your appaggio practice or help you adapt to appaggio as from the very beginning. And I made that course because when I realized my breathing for singing was not what I thought it was, it took me a couple years to really feel like I had made the transition to appaggio breath management. And it is my sincerest hope that the breathing for singing course that I made will make that far, far shorter. It's broken down into lectures and practices so that you can get all this different information about the posture of the body, how the mechanics of it work, and then practical exercises to practice with it so that you can adapt to appaggio breath management and get the absolute most out of your voice. I hope I've answered your question. I suppose if I were going to summarize, I'd say there's no consensus. Some people will insist you've got to stick your belly out and suck it back in order to get support. I would humbly suggest that is incorrect and that there are more efficient and, quite frankly, better ways to engage with your voice. That is appaggio breath management. Whether you learn it from my course or the AAA method, again, which is free, or from someplace else entirely, I would at least investigate appaggio, APPOGGIO, breath management, and come to your own conclusions about it. Let's keep going. Where is the soft palate, the roof of the mouth? Please explain. Yes, I can do this very quickly and easily. It does require some participation. Take your tongue and start on the roof of your mouth behind your front top teeth. And you will notice it's kind of hard. Start moving the tip of your tongue back along the roof of your mouth until you come to like a little cliff edge where it goes from bone to squish. The squish is the soft palate. Usually when you're doing that exercise with your tongue, it's quite lifted. If you can gain a sense of what those muscles feel like, then you can also learn how to lift your soft palate too. I hope that helps. Great question. Always happy to talk about the soft palate. In the last few months, I took vocal lessons and my passagi seems to have moved. Passagi would actually be the plural form of that, but passaggio seems to have moved. And this person is talking primarily about the secondo passaggio, probably mainly due to better closure of the folds and also more control over placement. My lower range and timbre had convinced me that I'm a low baritone with a secondo passaggio at around D4. My lowest note is around E flat 2, and my voice sounds the most strong and effortless between G2 and C4. Now, however, my quote-unquote break, I love the fact that you've done that in quotes, seems to be located around F sharp and G. Above that, I can sing in a clear head voice, and below that, I can use various degrees of chest quality. It is at those two notes that my voice feels uncertain, shaky, and weak. How would something like that be explained in the theoretical readings you had? For example, a baritone with tenor-like passagi or vice versa. Thanks for the amazing content, by the way. So, I don't like to speculate on vocal range designations or FOX without having a chance to hear you personally and also work through exercises and listen to your vowel alignment, how you're using your voice, all those kinds of things. The fact of the matter is that breathing, vowel alignment, vowel modifications, they all make a difference in how the secondo passaggio presents itself to us and how we navigate it. Most tenors aren't going to sing in E flat 2. That is far too low. I mean, it's not just kind of outside the boundary, it's like in a different league for most tenors. Now, I'm not saying that you're not a tenor. I'm just saying that that is a very unusual note to sing, but I don't know how you are singing it. If by singing you mean you can kind of vocal fry it out, well, that's different than consistent tone quality. We evaluate FOC and vocal range proper by not the ultimate expansive notes that we can cover, but by the expansive notes that are consistent in sound. So the lowest note has the same kind of vocal quality as our highest note, and we also evaluate it by how smoothly or where we find the secundo passaggio. We also, of course, take into account where our comfort zones is, and you have addressed all of these things, but it doesn't change the fact that you have also said in the last few months, it appears to have shifted. This would suggest that there are other changes taking place, and it would be premature to come to any conclusions about your FOC while things are moving around that much. Additionally, when we use our voices in different ways, as you say here, I can use various degrees of chest quality. When we use our voices in different ways, it is typical to get the secundo passaggio to appear to be in a different location. Nothing physically has changed, but we're changing the balance of airflow and vocal fold engagement, subglottic air pressure and vocal fold engagement. And that means that we are going to get a different response. The secundo passaggio can appear to be in a different location. That F sharp or G might be because right now you are not making as many vowel modifications and you're kind of pushing a little bit more. I don't know. I haven't heard you. It might be something more for your current teacher to weigh in upon. And finally, it is very much worth considering that when we talk about the secundo passaggio for the baritone and tenor FOCs, if you had your secundo passaggio here, if you determined it was here, that would be your sort of lower baritone. Here would be a sort of middling baritone. Here would be a lyric baritone. Sometimes also baritenors, depending on whom you ask. This would be tenor robusto. This would be spinto tenor. This is getting on for lyric tenor. The point I'm trying to make here is that all of these different FOCs, from baritone through tenor that I've just spoken about, are all separated by mere semitones, and it is very easy for us to inadvertently push beyond one most balanced place, or reduce it so that we don't get as good a performance. Without hearing you, without putting you through a bunch of exercises and listening for how you're aligning vowels and how the performance of your voice is working, it's not really possible for me to say. And you've provided some information which on the surface would seem helpful, but actually creates more questions. And I cannot come to any assumptions about your voice, again, without really going through the exercises specifically with you, hearing the vowel alignment, hearing the balance of your voice, and then, in a bit of time probably, coming to some conclusions about where that secundo passaggio is in its most balanced position. My sort of overarching advice that I would give to you is to try to avoid coming to any conclusions yourself, because it is very easy for us to push our voices into a certain FOC out of a desire to be of that FOC. Instead, look for the most efficient usage of your voice. Look for where it is flowing the best, where you feel the least resistance, where you get the most consistency of sound across the various registers, and that will in turn provide you with your answer as to your FOC. It will reveal itself in time if you follow those practices. Great question, great question. Hi Jeff, thank you for the amazing videos. Do you think it would be possible to add captions of the vowels on their respective sections for future videos? That would help a lot in the event that we lose our place or miss the explanation. This question comes up from time to time, and it's not strictly speaking about singing, obviously. It's about how I produce the videos. And I think about it all the time, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments below. I have avoided doing it thus far, probably for the biggest reason is the amount of additional production time it would take for me to do it. I have slowed my production down recently, quite frankly, because I've been feeling a bit of burnout and I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to navigate through it entirely. Doing this would increase the workload, would probably exacerbate the burnout, and I'm really reluctant to do that right now. On the other hand, on a more positive note, specifically, you've asked about the vowels for their respective sections, and that's different than I thought about it originally. Usually, I am asked to put the vowels like underneath the whole video throughout the various exercises, and that I would resist because it is my desire that you internalize the exercise and you internalize the vowels. And I also think that on a grander level, our practice is an oral one. It's one of listening. And so I want you to use your ears to listen as much as possible, not only to your own voices, but also to the examples that I give. I don't want to add any more information at those moments because the way that I am singing the examples is the way that I want you to try to emulate them in your own voice, to have that kind of connectivity between the vowels when I demonstrate them, the flow of the exercise, where I'm placing consonants, where I'm not. I've heard a lot of examples where people are they're thinking that they're singing back the exercise as I have sung it, or they're singing along with me, but you can clearly hear that they're singing them differently. It is my concern that adding more visual information at those moments will only make that more difficult to achieve. And so for all of those reasons, I have chosen not to do this up to this point. I'm open to thoughts on this though, so leave some comments for me about this topic and perhaps we can have a conversation about it and we can see if there's a path forward. As of right now, I'm not going to start this because of what I started off with, which is just feeling kind of very tired. If any of you are creators, whether it's here on YouTube or elsewhere, and you've dealt with burnout and particularly dealt with it successfully, then I would love to hear how that worked for you. I think I've got one or two more questions. First day for me using this warm-up. I love the challenge of it, but it's a real struggle for me to do the vocal runs because my throat is tight. Any suggestions for lessening the tightness? Usually, tightness in the throat is an excess of vocal fold engagement. That is usually caused by not enough subglottic air pressure, not enough support, if you like. So my suggestion would be evaluate your breathing. And I specifically mean how you are engaging with your voice. If you are not practicing passaggio breath management, I talked about it earlier in this video, I would suggest you investigate it. You can even go back in this video and look at that section by way of starting. I have a course on this on my website, jeffrolka.com, which is all about breathing for singing. It's called Breathing for Singing. That's usually the reason why we get tight in the throat, is that there is not enough subglottic air pressure to allow the vocal fold to release entirely. If you are quote-unquote belly breathing or you are otherwise convinced that your breathing is adequate, the tightness in your throat would suggest otherwise. So I would, again, humbly submit that start with that. Out of that practice, you can look at vowel alignment and balance of the subglottic air pressure and vocal fold engagement, and that will take away the tightness. It is a process. I've made it sound kind of fast and simple. I hope that it will go quickly for you, but it is not a fast and simple process, especially if you've been singing for some time and have grown accustomed to singing where you feel that your throat is tight. That is indicative of a pattern of habits, or a habit pattern, not sure how that's phrased, around how you're engaging with your voice. And it is quite likely going to take a little bit of time to circumvent those old habits so that you can release that engagement around the vocal folds. And lastly, have a question. Athletes vary the intensity of their practice and conditioning workouts. For example, there is off-season practice and conditioning, and what is done during the season. Some work in cycles and some have heavy and light days. Usually the first practice after a game is a light practice, and so on. What about singing workouts? Do you know any singers or teachers who recommend something similar? Maybe a day of upper register work followed by a cool down day, and then resumption of mainly chest and passaggio work, for example. Maybe a difference in what you do between gigs and what you do on a road trip or tour. Perhaps more an issue for unamplified singers, but just wondering. P.S. Not only do baritones have such rich tones, they get down so low. They do, don't they? It's fascinating. I love making the baritone videos. I love when I get to hear people singing along with them from time to time, because it's just fascinating to me to hear those low tones. There are a few best practices that I would suggest, though nothing quite so regimented. You are absolutely right. In athletics, often after a game, it's going to be a light workout or something to that effect. For singing, there are a couple guiding principles. When you're beginning secondo passaggio practice, and I'm specifically thinking of tenors and baritones, this might apply to the primo passaggio for mezzos and sopranos. 5 to 10 minutes a day is a good place to start until that transition becomes habitual. In other words, you're no longer thinking about what you have to do or what register you're meant to be in. Beyond that, then you can certainly do more than 5 or 10 minutes, but in the beginning days of working on the secondo passaggio, 5 to 10 minutes a day. Daily practice is better than once a week. That's kind of true throughout the musician realm, but can't really be stated enough. Heavy and light, usually the first practice game. Singing workouts, singers, teachers recommend something similar. No one that I've ever come across has talked about it that way. Certainly not with that degree of specificity. Like the 5 to 10 minute rule for beginning secondo passaggio practice, it's a big rule that has been talked about to me by a variety of different teachers. You shouldn't really need a cool down day after your secondo passaggio practices. If you're doing a secondo passaggio practice and you feel like you're a bit thrashed, evaluate that secondo passaggio practice. You can certainly evaluate the necessity for your practice when you are gigging a lot or performing a lot, and I don't think this matters between unamplified singers versus those who are singer-songwriters using microphones and things like that. If you're gigging every day, it might be more important for you to do a cool down or warm down exercise at the end of the day to just remind yourself of proper vowel alignment, proper registration event practice, just to kind of get back into that most efficient neutral zone from what you may have been doing on stage. Thinking back to when I was touring more frequently and making records, I would go in for my lessons and like no warm-up was really required because I was singing so much every day. But it's still very valuable to go through a small amount of the vocalizations in order to make sure that you are retaining good alignment and secondo passaggio habits. You want to retain your good habits from all the practice that you have done. So there is an ebb and flow to vocalization practice and one's practice, and that is the big point that I would summarize all this with, which is effectively listen to your voice. If you have had a very long day of talking or singing the day before, it might be that you need a very light warm-up to begin with and then move on to more of your other practices. If you haven't been singing very much at all, then it may be, quite frankly, the same, or it might just be a very kind of middling, neutral amount of warm-ups. Listen to your voice. Everyone is going to be slightly different in this capacity, but if you're getting hoarse a lot of time or you're having some other effects that are unwanted, have a careful look at your talking, singing load, how you're using your voice, what have you been doing vocalization-wise that week, and perhaps adjust a little bit to be a little more kind and gentle with your voice. It is always best to go back to the most easy place in your phonation, in your singing voice. If you are finding that you're having struggles, come back to that centralized location where it's easy for you to sing effectively, meaning with good vowel alignment, good phonation, consistent tone, good intonation, and then expand from there. Thank you so much for all the questions. As always, I hope this helps. My name is Jeff. If you've got other questions, leave them in the comments below. And until next time, I will say thank you so very much for watching. Do remember that there's Patreon if you want to get these as MP3s. And thank you if you've subscribed. Take really good care of your voices, enjoy singing, and hopefully we'll see you again. Bye.